Methodists have a built-in advantage when it comes to this issue because when we talk about grace, we talk about 4 acts of grace, or 4 movements, if you think about it as a musical piece, or you might call it 4 moments of grace. I like when people call it the 4 graces, as if they're sisters in a dance circle, the 4 graces. I love all of those word pictures. But I think that the way we talk about grace, these 4 acts or moments of grace, gives us a huge advantage. So here they are. The first is a grace that goes ahead of us and calls to us when we don't even know we need grace. It's like the hound of heaven, if you will, has come searching for us when we don't even know we're lost. And that's what we as Methodists call prevenient grace. It's a grace that goes ahead of us. A grace before we know we need it. Prevenient grace. Then the second act of grace is a grace that brings us into a new relationship with God. And this gets called saving grace. This is the grace that brings us into a new relationship with God, whether you call that liberation or salvation or deliverance, harmony. There are so many good ways to talk about salvation. Then a third act of grace is a grace that cleans us up, and that's called a sanctifying grace. And this is one that we're well known for as a holiness movement. The expectation is that coming into this new relationship with God will have an actual impact on how we live, the quality of our life and character. And so this is a sanctifying grace. I love the word picture. The difference between saving grace and sanctifying grace is the difference between somebody buying a rundown house and when they actually move into it and start fixing it up. So when we come into a new relationship with God, a lot of times that gets talked about in like financial terms, that Jesus paid for our sins, or God delivered us, right, from our past, or maybe it's a ransomed us from the works of the evil one. But it often has financial or legal overtones, and that's a saving grace. But a sanctifying grace is when the homeowner moves in and starts to fix up and clean up and live in the space. That's the difference between coming into a relationship with Christ, say becoming a Christian, and when Christ comes to indwell the soul, clean us up, make us the best version of ourselves. That's sanctifying. And then we have a fourth act of grace, a fourth grace, which is a grace that leads us home. And that's called persevering grace. That is the grace of walking in one direction for a really long time into glory, right? That's how that often gets talked about. So that is a persevering grace. So we have prevenient grace before we even know it. We have a saving grace that brings us into a new relationship with God. We have a sanctifying grace that cleans us up, makes us the best version of ourselves in a community. And then a persevering grace which leads us home, helps us to walk all the days of our life in a faithfulness. And I personally have found that these 4 graces, for me, constitute a web of grace, an understanding of grace that resonates with Ephesians chapter 2 in such a beautiful way, it makes me want to sing. That it's all by God's grace.